So in this video we're going to talk about the conventional account of language use. And we're going to see how Lewis uses his definition of a convention to say how is it that we count as using a particular language in the first place. And the answer is going to be there is just a certain kind of convention, a specific kind of convention to use the language that we in fact use. Now before we start talking about conventions, we should actually take a quick step back and just think about language and what Lewis is thinking a language is. Lewis is thinking of it. A language is basically just a way to pair words with particular kinds of meanings. So let's just take a really simple example. So here are two English sentences. A cat is on the mat, a chair is on the mat. And clearly they say different things. And the reason why they say different things is because this sentence, a cat is on the mat, well, the words in it, some of the words in it mean different things to the words in this. Cat means that kind of creature that I've feebly drawn, and chair means that kind of piece of furniture. And as a result, the entire sentences talk about different situations. This is used to talk about a situation where a cat is on the mat. This is used to talk about a situation where a chair is on the mat. So what we see is that these kinds of sentences, they can be paired with situations that make the sentences true. And we can basically think of the situations that make a sentence true, we can think about that basically as the sentence's meaning. And this is part of what makes English the way it is the kind of choices between how sentences are assigned particular meanings. What situations are assigned to a particular sentence to make it true or false. The important thing here is if we understand a language that way, where a language is a combination of words and meanings assigned to them, then you could have a different language with the very same words if you just associated them with different meanings. So in the actual English language, this sentence is associated with a situation like that. However, we could define a new language where what cat means in English means the same thing as chair means in English and vice versa. Flip them around in other words. And then we have a new language where this sentence actually picks out that situation, and the second sentence picks out the first kind of situation. If we change the meaning in that way, that would just be a different language. We'd no longer be speaking English, we'd be speaking some sort of separate language on the way that Lewis is thinking about it. So a language is it's not just a set of words, it's not just a set of sentences, it's a way of assigning meanings to words and sentences. This point might seem a little bit trivial, but actually it's good to keep it in mind right now because it will help avoid some confusions later on when we talk about Lewis's account. So that's how we're answering the question, what is a language? The question we're really interested in, the question we're going to be talking about for all the rest of today is, well, why do we count as using that language rather than some other language? So as a matter of fact, English is the language that we speak. Our sentences have particular meanings, and that's a fact about English. And as we've been saying for the last few weeks, there's some sort of relationship between that fact, the fact about what our sentences mean, and the way that we use them. But what exactly is the relationship? What is it about the way that we use our sentences that make it the case that our words mean those things and our sentences mean those things? In virtue of what? What is it that we do that makes sentences mean those things? Because they don't just mean them by themselves. It's connected to the fact that we use them in the first place. Well, Lewis is going to say the fact that makes it so is that there's a certain kind of convention. But he states his convention in terms of two ideas which he basically defines. Now, it's important not to be tripped up here because he uses some words of ordinary English. But he gives them technical meanings that are related to their old meanings in English, but really you should just think about these as new concepts. So the first concept he introduces is the concept of being truthful in a particular language. And what it is to be truthful in a particular language is for the sentences that you say to generally be true in that language. So for instance, in English, as we saw, this sentence is associated with this situation. I might be truthful in English if, in general, when I say that sentence, the situation actually obtains. Likewise, I'm truthful in English if whenever I say this sentence, the situation obtains. And likewise for any other sentence. I'm truthful in the language when, in general, when I say a particular sentence in that language, the meaning that's assigned to it by that language is true. Now, something that's important to see right away is that to be truthful in one language sort of makes you automatically not truthful in other languages. So we saw that there's a sort of, we could invent a new language by flipping around the situations in which the sentences are true. So we could, in a sort of fake English, associate the second sentence with the first situation and the first sentence with the second situation. We actually, as a matter of fact, don't do that. But for that reason, we'll call our made-up language fake English. For this reason, we're not truthful in fake English, because the way we speak is we're not saying things that would be true if we were speaking fake English. When I say a chair is on the mat, it's not in general true that there's a cat on the mat, but that's the situation that fake English associates with that sentence. So whenever you're truthful in one language, you're automatically not truthful in a whole range of other possible languages. Because there really is no limit, as we're seeing it, on the possible languages there are. Any way of combining meanings with sentences is a possible language. Now, as a matter of fact, almost all the languages that are possible we don't speak, because we speak just one at a time. So whenever we're truthful in one language, you're going to be automatically not truthful in a bunch of other languages. And this is exactly why Lewis is talking about being truthful in a particular language rather than truthful in general. Because we're interested in that obtaining for a particular... Because, as we can see, you can be truthful in one language while simultaneously not being truthful in another. And we need a way to kind of distinguish those two things. So that's the idea of being truthful in a particular language. He also introduces the idea of being trusting in a particular language. Now, in this kind of context, trust basically means when somebody says something, you tend to believe it, unless you have good reason to do otherwise. But again, the relativization to a particular language is important. As Lewis is understanding it, to be trusting in a particular language is whenever somebody says a particular sentence, for you to believe the thing that is meant by that sentence in the language that you're supposed to be trusting in. So if I'm trusting in English, then whenever you say an English sentence, I come to believe the thing that that sentence would say in English. So if you say the cat is on the mat, that's the situation I come to believe obtains. If you say the chair is on the mat, that's the situation I come to believe obtains. And again, if you're trusting in one language, you're going to automatically count as not trusting in other languages. Because as we said, well, we can invent this language fake English, where the sentence a cat is on the mat means a chair is on the mat, and chair is on the mat means a cat is on the mat. In other words, you just flip around the meanings. And it's not the case that we're trusting in fake English, because if I say a chair is on the mat, you don't come to believe that this situation obtains. But that is what you would have to come to believe if you were trusting in fake English. This is why you count as being trustful. This is why you count as being trusting in the particular language you speak, because the situation you come to believe obtains is the one that English pairs with the sentences, and not this other language I've cooked up. So that's what it is to be trusting in a particular language. To be truthful in a particular language is to, in general, say sentences that are true in that language. To be trusting in a particular language is to, when people say sentences of that language, believe the situations that that language associates with those sentences to be the case. And then we can raise this to the level of an entire community. So we'll say that a community is truthful in a particular language if, in general, they try to avoid saying sentences that are false in that language. So we are truthful in English because, in general, we try to avoid saying sentences that are false according to English, according to the English meanings. We count as trusting in English because, in general, we believe that people are truthful in English. And so we come to believe the things expressed by those sentences according to English when people say sentences. So that's the same ideas of truthfulness and trust, but now applying to an entire community rather than to a particular person. The reason why these two things are important, truthfulness and trust, is because if you think about it, they're regularities. For a community to be truthful in a particular language is for them to say certain kinds of sentences and avoid saying other kinds of sentences. That's a kind of regularity. It's a regularity in speech. To be trusting in a particular language is basically to form beliefs in a certain way. When somebody says a particular kind of sentence, you in general kind of come to have a particular kind of belief, namely that the situation expressed by that sentence in English is actually the case. So both of these are regularities. The first is a regularity in action, the second is a regularity in belief. Remember in the last video we said it was going to be important for conventions to be applicable to regularities of belief, and this is exactly why, because our regularity in trust is a regularity in belief rather than action. So we have these two different kinds of regularities, truthfulness and trust, among a particular kind of population or among a particular kind of community. And these are the ingredients Lewis uses to define basically what the convention for speaking a particular language is. He says that you count as speaking a particular language, or a community counts as speaking a particular kind of language, when that community is truthful in that language, and they're also trusting in that language. So we count as speaking English, rather than say fake English, because we're truthful in English, we try to avoid saying things that are false in English, and we're also trusting in English. And not just that we are both of those two things, but that there is a convention of both of those things holding. There's a convention of truthfulness, and there's a convention of trust. What does that mean? Well, we can unpack that, given what we said about conventions in the last video, because we saw there's basically 5 important things that go into a convention. And Lewis thinks that actually, for both truthfulness and trust, all of those 5 conditions are actually satisfied. So we said the very first condition of a convention is that, well, everybody has to actually do the regularity, more or less. Maybe there can be some exceptions, but not too many. And Lewis thinks that's the case. He thinks, in general, it is true that we try to avoid saying false sentences of English. And in general, it is true that when people say sentences of English, you come to believe what those sentences say in English. So he thinks, first of all, the regularity does actually obtain. People are, as a matter of fact, both truthful in English when they're English speakers and trusting in English when they're English speakers. He thinks the second and third conditions obtain as well. So remember, the second condition is that everybody believes that everybody conforms to the convention. The third condition is that if you believe that everybody else acts according to the convention, that gives you a very strong reason to act according to the convention as well. And again, he thinks both of these obtain. The second is kind of easier to think about. So as a matter of fact, we do in general think each other to be truthful. We do in general think that in general people tell the truth. We also think that in general people tend to believe each other when they say things. So not only are we truthful and trusting, but we believe that those things hold throughout our communities. We also have reason to act in those ways, given that we believe everybody else will act in those ways as well. So this kind of goes in 2 parts. So first of all, if I think that other people in general are truthful in a particular language, that gives me reason to be trusting in that language. Because if I in general believe that people are going to try and avoid saying things that are false in English, if I think that's something that's true, then whenever somebody does say something in English, that should be evidence for me that it is true, because people try to avoid saying false things. I.e., I will come to believe what that sentence says in English. I.e., I will act in a trusting way in English. So if I believe everybody is truthful in English, that gives me reason to be trusting in English. But likewise, if everybody believes that people tend to be trusting in English, that is, they tend to believe the things that are said to them in English, that gives them reason, Lewis thinks, to be truthful. Because in general, people want to communicate true beliefs. You know, if I'm speaking to you, I want to give you true beliefs. If you will believe the things that I say to you in English, a very good way for me to give you true beliefs is to say sentences that are true in English. So, if I believe that everybody else is trusting in English, that gives me a reason to be truthful in English. So we see that the third condition of Lewis's account is satisfied as well. The fourth condition that we talked about was the idea that we prefer that it's in everybody's interest that everybody conform. And we prefer that than slightly less than everybody conforming. And this one I think is pretty straightforward. If everybody speaks English, if everybody is truthful and trusting in English, we want people, it's much better for us that everybody is doing that rather than just some but not all people are doing that. And then the last condition we talked about that's important for us is the idea that, well, in a convention generally, the regularity you're thinking about is not the only way for the other conditions to hold. And that's clearly true here as well. And this is where it's important that we're talking about truthfulness and trust in a particular language. One way that we can see the choice of language is arbitrary is by just looking around the world and seeing that there are lots of different languages. There are so many different languages in the world, but none are clearly better than the others. For example, compare English and French. English isn't better than French, or French isn't better than English as a method of communication. They're equally good. Either would have been a good way to communicate. It's just that some communities ended up speaking English and other communities ended up speaking French. So just like other conventions, like what side of the road we drive on, the convention of the particular language we speak is to a certain degree an arbitrary one. There are other ways to do the same thing equally well. Now here it's very important that we're focusing on truthfulness and trust in a particular language, like English. Because when we focus on truthfulness and trust in a particular language, it's easy to see what the alternative is. An alternative to truthfulness and trust in English might be something like truthfulness and trust in French. If we were thinking instead about truthfulness and trust per se, it would be much harder to think about what the alternative is. Like, what would be the alternative convention? It seems like being truthful and being trusting are actually really crucial elements to communicating with each other, that it would be very hard for communication to happen if we didn't try to tell the truth and we didn't in general trust each other. So that's why it's so important that we focus on language-specific truthfulness and trust. Because otherwise, it's hard to explain, like, what is the arbitrariness? Where does the conventional bit really get in? But we can do that if we focus on truthfulness and trust in a particular language. So we've now gone through all the conditions, and we've seen that there's an argument for thinking that actual language use conforms to the definition that Lewis gave. Because Lewis says, well, what it takes for a community to speak a language is for there to be a convention of truthfulness and trust in that language. For there to be a convention of truthfulness and trust in that language entails 5 things, if Lewis is correct about language. That everybody does it, that everybody believes that that's what they do, everybody believes that that's what's done, gives them a reason to do it as well, that they prefer that everybody does it rather than less than everybody does it, and that it's in some sense arbitrary. And Lewis thinks that for both truthfulness and trust in English, or any particular language that's spoken in a particular community, he thinks you'll see that all of these conditions are fulfilled when a particular community speaks that language. So that's how we apply the notion of a convention to language speaking. We come up with this idea of truthfulness and trust in a particular language, and a conventional account of language says, well, there's just a convention for those regularities to obtain in the particular population.